Real quick before we start, we're having another live show this Sunday, tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, on this channel, No Bullshit. This time we're bringing back a longtime friend of the show, Hunter Avalone, who will be joining us to talk about politics and more. So come on by tomorrow and drop a comment, and maybe we'll start discussing your discussions on the live show. Thanks for your time, and now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we turn to talking about yet another project from the Marvel Cinematic Universe that's not only getting woke, but also we're seeing one of the film's makers attack its fans once again. This time it's Black Widow that's getting itself into hot water lately. And this is very unfortunate too, since not only is Black Widow the next Marvel movie to come out, set to release in May of next year, but also Black Widow seemed to be one of the few upcoming Marvel projects that hadn't got corrupted by woke SJW influenced politics yet. Everyone loves the character, and of course, everyone loves the actress Scarlett Johansson as well. So no one was even complaining about yet another project becoming a female-led one from Marvel. No one cares because it's Black Widow, and she's the shit, basically. And almost everyone was ready for her to get her own spin-off movie far before this one was even announced. Well, at least we were looking forward to it until recently. This week, one of the writers for the new movie made a big mistake. They started opening their mouth too much, which led to, first, calls for more diversity and less violence in the film, and then this writer even made the bonehead move of attacking the fans, calling us derogatory terms like fanboys and trolls. Not a good look. And turning on the fans has literally worked for no one when they've tried it, but now we got this new genius of a writer for Marvel pulling this same bullshit once again. But all this bad news really isn't as surprising as you'd think once you get a little more familiar with this Black Widow writer. Meet Jack Schaefer. She's a 40-year-old woman in Hollywood scriptwriter who barely has any experience, all things considered. But the few things she has worked on really do say a lot about her. First, she co-wrote Marvel's first film of this year, Captain Marvel. That's right, that cringy social justice warrior-filled pro-feminist dumpster fire was Schaefer's handiwork in part. And it wasn't her only lady-themed project of this year either. Next, about a month after Captain Marvel, Jack Schaefer's second movie of the year came out called The Hustle. This was a smaller comedy film and a more minor hit at the box office, but it is worth noting since The Hustle is a lady reboot of a more famous legendary comedy called Dirty Rotten Scoundrels from 1988. So now, I think you guys can start to see where this is going. We've got an inexperienced lady screenwriter who got affirmative action into a couple major Hollywood movies, first of which is the so-called first female-led Marvel movie, Captain Marvel, which turned into a marketing and PR disaster as we've gone over extensively, although it did of course make a lot of money too. And then, immediately following that, this same SJW writer makes a lady reboot of all things. And now, this week, she's trying to mess up Black Widow as well. And I have to say, I'm not too excited to hear about this at all. Now, we've got the setup down here, so let's move on to some articles about this, shall we? First, there's this IndieWire one called Marvel's Black Widow scribe Jack Schaefer responds to Captain Marvel trolls. And already, before we begin, we can see the term troll is being misused again by the online press sites. They constantly misuse this term, usually as a way to demean and belittle disgruntled fans, who tend to have legitimate complaints, but our voices are pushed to the side as we're dubbed trolls, meaning we're not to be taken seriously, at least according to these left-leaning journalists. Let's go ahead and read on here anyway and see where this all goes. Black Widow writer Jack Schaefer first burst onto the scene with 2009's charming indie sci-fi rom-com Timer, which she wrote and directed. But she's now ready to take on the big leagues with her latest Marvel script. Directed by Kate Shortland, Lore and Berlin Syndrome, the film stars Scarlett Johansson as the titular S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and savvy KGB assassin. Black Widow releases May 1st, 2020. I wasn't a huge superhero movie fan before starting to work at Marvel, but now that I'm doing it, there's just so much opportunity to make big, positive statements, Schaefer told Inverse. Especially something like Captain Marvel and Black Widow, to have these female-centered stories, I just can't not be involved in that. Schaefer also addressed the internet trolls that slammed this year's Captain Marvel, directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, in anticipation of the backlash that might await her as a female screenwriter of a woman-led Marvel film. Schaefer reportedly worked on the Captain Marvel script, but is not a credited writer on that film. When people react with hate, it saddens me. I think it's a shame, Schaefer said. But that's not where I want to put my energy. I'm not interested in the loud sour grapes voices. Well, I think that's called not being able to take criticism, lady. And also, this whole introduction does not get me hyped for this writer whatsoever. And it kind of makes me lose interest in the Black Widow movie altogether. All I see here is a couple of inexperienced lady writers and directors who got into positions of power for political and diversity reasons. That means they weren't hired based on merit or the quality quality of their work, which was probably the last thing considered in the hiring process for them. Marvel and Disney could have gotten 100 other writers and directors to make this spy-based thriller, ones who had more experience and who would have certainly done a better job. Maybe perhaps someone who worked in the genre before would have been a good choice. For example, they could have got one of the Mission Impossible directors to work on it, or someone who worked on James Bond, another spy-based film. Anything would have been better than hiring the first 2 females you came across outside in the studio parking lot. Next, this Black Widow writer says they weren't even a huge superhero movie fan before starting to work at Marvel, which appears to be not that long ago since her first project for them was Captain Marvel, which came out a few months ago. So maybe she's been with Marvel for like a year? And that means maybe she's been a fan of these films for a little bit longer. But her being a fan here doesn't really mean exactly what you think it means. She's a fan because she had to be, because it was her job. And I have a little experience with this personally. I previously worked as a tech guy on a number of TV shows in Hollywood. And when you become a fan like this, it really just means you watch the crap you're making at the time, and it's not as bad as you thought it was previously. That happened for me when working on things like cooking shows or a workout challenge show. After a while, I kind of got into it, half forcing myself to begin with and then partially enjoying it after a while. But you never really take the kind of material seriously as a true fan if you weren't into it before, let alone if you're a legitimate artist who should be hired to write and direct these works based on their enthusiasm for the subject. Fortunately for me, I was working mostly in the camera and lighting department, so very little creativity and personal voice was required to contribute in those projects I worked on. But needless to say, this is not the kind of person who should be working on a more professional, story-driven Hollywood movie that's part of a greater, so far coherent cinematic universe. Not to mention, Jack Schaefer here is a frickin' writer for these projects. She's not just some stylist or assistant or wardrobe consultant. This is a head writer who didn't even care about the superhero genre until about a year ago. Let that sink in, people, and just picture how bad that kind of leadership can go on a high-stake project like this. Finally, after admitting to not liking this genre, in her next breath, Ms. Schaefer directly admits why she's doing this creative job in a genre she's not familiar with nor a fan of. The real reason is she's doing it to make a big positive statement, meaning she wants to preach and push her SJW feminist agendas. What a joke. And can you imagine if this happened the other way around? What if I myself, a straight white male writer, got hired to make a cheesy romantic comedy, a genre dominated by females? Then when I was interviewed about the project, I admitted to never liking rom-coms much before getting hired to make one myself. So you might ask why I got hired. Well, I got hired because my identity fit into the group the studio executives were trying to pander to. Then on top of that, I next say that I'm glad to be making this kind of movie anyway, even though I don't like it, because I want to make it so I can use this platform I don't deserve and haven't earned in order to push positive statements about my own personal political beliefs, which happen to be pro-American conservative beliefs, by the way. Now, how do you think that kind of setup would go over in the press or in Hollywood? Because I don't think those people would even hire a guy into a women's field like this, considering they're not qualified. This clearly would never happen, but in this politically charged SJW-led clown world we're all living in, this kind of stuff happens all the time in the opposite direction. Females get pushed into male spaces even though they're not interested in them, because the studio executives want to pander to liberal audiences and look woke in the process. So instead of hiring writers who are qualified and who love the genre, they're hiring SJWs who don't care, aren't interested, or sometimes hate it, but they have the right genitals and skin color, so they get hired anyway. And God forbid we hire writers who want to tell a good story that actually entertains people. Instead, though, we're getting people who want to preach pro-leftist and progressive politics. Next, let's move on to an article from Inverse called Black Widow writer Jack Schaefer isn't scared to make the fanboys mad, with a subtitle saying, "I'm not interested in the loud sour grapes voices." Not surprising coming from someone who worked on Captain Marvel and a lady reboot in current year 2019. And just look at the picture of the writer in the background of this article. It's behind the words here, and no offense, but this chick looks like a crazy person. And in my experience, if they have crazy eyes, they look crazy and talk crazy, they're probably a little bit nutso. Regardless, let's see why Miss Schaefer here, who isn't scared to make the fanboys mad, which if I'm translating it properly, and I do speak fluent SJW, so to me this really means screw the fan base, I'm going to make the movie about me and what I want to talk about. They even use the term fanboys here in a derogatory way, like how they've called their detractors trolls before too. Really though, we're not fanboys, trolls, or anything nefarious whatsoever. What we really are is consumers and potential movie goers who may see your film if it looks good, but instead of trying to entice us and draw us into their movies, like they should be doing, well, instead, all of these current year SJW writers and journalists, they're turning on the fans and saying, screw you. We're going to disrespect this property on purpose to spite the fans and deny the people of what they want. Now, why would anyone selling a product treat their potential customers like this? Well, that's the thing here. We're actually past the point of trying to make money. These projects aren't even trying to sell or be profitable anymore. They're just trying to push liberal propaganda and get their biased messages out there the only way they can, by forcing them down our throats and putting them into popular media and drowning us in Marxist messaging along the way, whether we like it or not. Schaefer has a bold vision for superhero movies of the coming decade. More sympathetic villains, less glamorization of weaponry, and stronger representation of marginalized voices. Yikes. The comic book movie fans who prefer ultra-violent shootouts, 100% evil villains, and casts that look like they did a decade or two ago, Schaefer says, I'm not interested in adhering to comic canon that is discriminatory in any way or that violates my value system. Even if her stance makes Black Widow a target for sabotage on sites like Rotten Tomatoes a la the response to Captain Marvel, don't expect Schaefer to budge from her passion for positive change by even an inch. When people react with hate, it saddens me. I think it's a shame, she says. But that's not where I want to put my energy. I'm not interested in the loud sour grapes voices. Well, I gotta say, you lost me at stronger representation of marginalized voices. What the hell does that even mean anyway? How do voices get marginalized? I don't get it. Sometimes I like to use margarine instead of butter when I'm cooking. Is that related to marginalized voices? Is that what this nutbar is talking about? Really, all kidding aside, this is obviously more woke SJW bullshit. Representation, or what's being called pro-diversity in some places, well, that just means they want more women and minorities and everything. And of course, also, let's not forget, they also want less whites. Then, they even dare to call the complaints and bad reviews of movies like Captain Marvel sabotage, as if everyone that hated that movie is just lying or pretending. Please, plenty of people had many legitimate complaints about Captain Marvel, and I didn't even end up hating it as much as I thought, but Captain Marvel certainly wasn't perfect or untouchable either, like what this article is implying. Really, this is another tactic used to brush off and ignore detractors. First, they call us internet trolls or obsessive fanboys, basically ad homineming us before we can even speak. Then they call our bad reviews sabotage, as if we're some kind of spy out to get these people for political reasons. No, not really. Really, you and Marvel and Brie Larson and all these other liberal assholes, you're attacking us for being men and liking comic books and wanting the adaptions of them to reflect in film. Schaefer here even says she doesn't give a shit about the comic book canon. What the heck? You should care, lady, because you're making a comic book movie. And those comic books are the whole reason these movies are even getting made. In the end, we've got another Marvel project that's reaching levels of wokenization we had never thought was possible before, and we didn't realize was an issue with Black Widow before. At first, Black Widow seemed like it would be an easy win for Marvel too, with people loving the character and the actress Scarlett Johansson for years. But as with most films recently, and especially with Marvel films in Phase 4, the SJWs in charge managed to screw things up, and I really worry Black Widow will become some sort of Captain Marvel Part 2. What do you guys think? Is Black Widow's writer getting woke? Why would Marvel hire an inexperienced writer who doesn't like the genre anyway? And will Scarlett Johansson's talent and charm be able to save this project from another Captain Marvel level SJW disaster? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.